Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Podcast with No Name. As always, I'm your host, Scott, and I am joined by my good friend, Mr. Luke Steele. Luke, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Very, very well.
Good, good, good. We've got a slightly different setup today. We've got cams for the first time on the show, so I'm going to apologize in advance for any technical hiccups that we inevitably will have. I'll try to get it set up, so hopefully it's looking good. Hopefully when people filter into the chat, we can get some confirmation that audio's good, video's good, all that jazz. But yeah, mate, it's been a bit of a week. Normally we kind of like
Yes.
ease ourselves into it and we talk about what we've been playing and things like that. But it's been a bit of a week. We only caught up obviously a week or so ago, but since then we've had this Xbox business update, which
Yeah.
was the main purpose of this was to talk about that. But in the middle of everything, Sony released their financials and they had some interesting tidbits about potentially having more multi-platform releases, and then towards the end of the week, Switch 2 rumors, with the Switch 2 unfortunately potentially being delayed back into 2025. So yeah, it's been a hell of a week, mate. And I was telling Luke, just for everyone listening, I was telling Luke, you can see right on the screen now, if you look, you can see me
There it is.
scrolling through my temps, just checking how's my
Nice.
CPU doing, how's my GPU doing. Not too
Uh,
bad, it turns out. Although Helldivers absolutely blitzes my GPU. Like it's at like
yeah.
96% utilization pretty much
Yeah,
throughout, but it hangs in
mine's at
there.
like I think mine's at like 99% utilization.
Oh,
Um
yeah, so it takes
yeah.
advantage, shall we
Takes
say.
advantage, but it's also quite well optimized for CPUs as well, because if you track it in real time, it's actually using a good percentage of nearly every core.
Yeah,
So that's good. It's just really good PC port in general. Actually, it's very, very good. Very little to complain about with it, apart
yeah.
from I guess that it doesn't have DLSS or FSR, but that's about it.
Yeah, I did notice that it does have some options in there that I thought, oh, is this DLSS? But no, they're just kind of some maybe internal upscaling options. But
Yeah, it's their own.
yeah, but as you say, yeah, really important. It looks beautiful, even
Yeah, it's a
even
good
on
looking
my
game.
lowly 4070 Super. It looks beautiful. This gameplay that you see here is not going to be the best gameplay. It's only the second time I've picked it up, and I jumped in earlier today just to grab some footage for the show. And they've got the robots in the game now. I thought it was all about bugs, but now there's robots.
Yeah,
So I just quick played, and I ended up playing with some people, and we failed miserably. It was like Rescue Zero. Oh, sorry, Rescue 30. We ended up not rescuing any of them because I don't think any
yeah.
of us knew how to rescue anyone. So yeah, I've enjoyed the little I've played. I'm looking forward to hopefully playing a little bit more with you and BMG at
Yeah.
some point as well. We had a bit of a laugh with BMG and Juds when it came out. So has that been taking up most of your time there this past week? I saw. Look, have you been playing much
Yeah, I
else?
no, yeah, it must have been playing this. It's rare that a multiplayer game kind of hooked me very much, but this one definitely has. I think I've put in like 15 hours, I think, which is
Nice.
quite a lot for me.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's the kind of only thing I really want to play much of at the moment, and it's quite nice because you can just jump into it and do like a mission or two missions or whatever, and then move on, like just come out and then
Yeah.
you go back to it. But yeah, I've been playing quite a lot. Really enjoying it. It's just very fun,
Yeah.
very satisfying gameplay loop. Good progression. As I say, PC port's excellent. It runs really well. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's just blown up as well, hasn't it? In
Yeah.
terms of player count. So, which is great. I mean, I'm really happy for Arrowhead in particular, because it's doing extremely well. Um, Server issues aside, and they've had a few of those, but a lot
Yeah.
of that is because they just simply did not expect that this would be as popular as it
Yeah.
has been.
As you said, it has completely blown up. I think it hit 255,000 concurrent on Steam
Yep.
alone. I saw Arrowhead saying they had, and this was probably before Steam hit that peak, they had 360,000 concurrent across both platforms at one point. And yeah, I think they kind of openly admitted it kind of has surpassed expectations they had for the game,
Yeah.
which is great. You know, I've only played a little bit of it, but I really enjoyed what I played.
It's
The,
actually it's actually got over 300,000 concurrent now on
on
Steam at
Steam, has it?
this moment. Yes,
Yeah.
so it's really blown up.
Yeah, I mean that's great, especially considering I know it's a slightly cheaper title, but it's still a paid for title.
Mm.
You've got games. I saw someone kind of looking at games that was creeping up to in terms of concurrence on Steam, and it was not too far of Halo Infinite. I think Halo Infinite peaked at about 325, and obviously that's free to
Mm.
play, so that shows a lot of people are buying it, especially on PC as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it seems doing well. We've got Jenna in the chat. Hello, Jenna. Thank you very much for joining us,
Oh.
mate. As the first person join us, can you let us know how the audio and video is, mate? That'll be wonderful. Obviously, I don't have the crisp 4K video of Mr. Steele. I don't have the same audio video set, but if you let us know how it is, mate, that'll be lovely. So, should we just get straight into it, Luke? Into
Yeah, yeah.
into the news. The internet basically fucking melted down last week, which was fascinating to see, especially in hindsight.
Yeah.
With following the business update. But before we get into actually what was spoken about by, obviously it was Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, Matt Booty. What were your thoughts last week going into it as the rumor mill was kind of going ballistic, as people were melting down, people were quitting Xbox, people were selling Xboxes. The internet did truly go a little bit mad over a bunch of what were just at the time rumors. What were your thoughts heading into the event around what was being rumored?
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts were I don't know, like, I mean, it depends on what angle you were coming at it from. Diehard Xbox fans, and say that term really to allude to fanboys, effectively.
Talking
Obviously,
about
they
Tim Dog,
melted
Tim
down.
Dog, aren't you?
Well, just anybody. Yeah, we all know who they are, right? I mean, we know who they are. Those reactions were pretty absurd, really. Pretty in isolation, pretty funny. My reaction was, I mean, intrigue. I was interested in what was going to happen. Obviously, it doesn't affect me at all where Xbox or where anybody puts their games, because I've got every platform, so it doesn't make any difference. It's not as if I can't access them. I've always kind of, I mean, personally, I was kind of the mindset of I didn't like it in some ways. The rumors, like, and obviously now we can talk about what's actually happening and stuff, but the principle of it generally I'm not a big fan of, because I do think exclusive games are important to differentiate platforms, and I think it gives platform holders an incentive to invest more in their own games to try and get you to come to a platform. But there's a lot of nuances around that, and there's a lot of nuances around why Microsoft might not feel that that's and Xbox generally might not feel that that's something they want to do anymore, or at least to the same traditional extent that they've done before. But then again, a lot of the industry shifted around the last 5 or 6 years anyway. So my reaction to the rumors was that I'd have been surprised if they were all true at the time. Like, the extent to which some of this stuff was being pitched as going multi-platform, for example. I think I would have been surprised if that had all been true. But I think my reaction as well was that I just knew whatever they were going to say on Monday, no, not Monday, Thursday, it was never going to properly answer every question. They were always going to leave stuff somewhat open or unanswered, and I think that's what they did. But yeah, I think I mean, the most interesting thing was just the reaction to it, particularly on Twitter, which was just crazy, just absolute madness. Really entertaining though.
The reaction was like nothing I'd ever really seen before. To be honest with you, maybe it's just because I don't know, I wasn't on Twitter in the same way I am now. Back at the beginning of the Xbox One generation, so maybe I was kind of shielded from the reaction to you know, the always online and the
Yeah, yeah.
DRM stuff, and the we've got a product for that. It's called Xbox, you
Mm,
know, things like that. I wasn't quite as involved in the community
yeah.
back then. So yeah, this was kind of really unique in a
Mm,
way where it essentially almost galvanized the fan base in a negative way, where kind of unified everyone in kind of like Xbox is going to do something really bad, and people just completely shit the bed
yeah,
because of it. And
yeah,
I think you're right. I shared your thoughts where it was a case of whatever we're going to get. Well, firstly, I thought whatever we're going to get, it's probably not going to be as bad as people are making out. But
yeah,
secondly, it was always going to be left open at the end of
yeah,
it. You know, the statements were always going to be vague. I mean, if you look at when Phil Spencer talks generally, he purposefully talks
yeah,
very in very vague terms because he knows as a businessman things can change, and that was my main concern ahead of it. Was we were going to still be in the same situation where it wasn't going to be clear what was going to be exclusive and what wasn't, and we were going to have this case by case basis. And I don't necessarily mind that personally, because I kind of understand it. I understand why Microsoft may be kind of changing tact, although I do have concerns over any change in because of, you know, competition is good ultimately. You know,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
where it comes from. We don't want a PlayStation completely unopposed by other platforms. Um, as consumers, we simply, you know, we simply don't want that. So Evening Stubbs, thanks for jumping in, mate. Um, but we're going to constantly have, after every game announcement now, we're going to have, is this coming to
oh yeah,
PlayStation? Is it coming to Switch or Switch 2? You
yeah,
know, or when it gets announced. Um, every game that's announced, if they're not explicit at the beginning. I mean, even look at the conversations around Blade before this particular
mm,
announcement. They've still not talked about platforms for that, and that's probably because it's probably next generation, to be perfectly honest.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they've still not spoken about those platforms, and that was before this business update podcast that they did, and people were speculating then, is it going to be multi-platform, is it going to be multi-platform? And you're right, obviously exclusives can be important or are important to the platform, even if, you know, third-party games and microtransactions, etc., do make up the bulk of revenue. um, so yeah, it was interesting.
mm,
So let's get into what was actually announced then. So what we got was a 22 minute um, podcast,
yeah,
kind of like a little bit of a round table with Tina, who's joined by Phil, Sarah, and Matt. And they largely said what I kind of expected them to say. So I guess a lot of it was business fluff, as always, for these types of things. But the main takeaway from it was they're going to bring 4 games to other platforms. They refused to disclose which 4 games, which was an interesting
yeah,
choice. They kind of recommitted to hardware, and I know you were particularly fond of Sarah Bond's line regarding
yeah,
the technical leap.
yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
they reaffirmed day and date games on Game Pass. That was one of the rumors where people were saying, "Oh, they're gonna change there," and that was largely it.
Yep.
I don't think there was really too much else other than, you know, 34 million Game Pass subscribers and other little tidbits that we got from. Those were the 3 big takeaways. And if the rumors are to be believed, and it kind of makes sense, those 4 games will be Hi-Fi Rush, Sea of Thieves, Grounded, and Pentiment. So
Yeah.
obviously not Starfield, not Halo, not Gears of War, for smaller games, but they didn't rule out any of those other games coming to other platforms. Again, they were vague. They want to keep it open so they can make choices in the future. So with that in mind, what were your thoughts on I guess the podcast and what they opted to share with people?
Yeah, I think it was fine. Like I think they assuaged some of the main fears. I think one of the ones that was bubbling a bit more perhaps was the Game Pass one. In terms of a change to how that worked for day and date. And I think I was never really that worried about that going about about that going into it, because it just wouldn't make sense from Microsoft's perspective to do that, because their whole business model is for Xbox is based
Yeah,
around Game Pass right
that
now.
would have been a disaster. Like
It
if
would have
they
been
had
a
announced that,
disaster.
that would have been them completely shitting the bed at that
Yeah,
point.
and also they got into Game Pass because their games weren't selling very well, like they weren't shifting enough units, so it made sense for them to go into something else, and obviously it has worked.
Yeah,
So for them to then change and then go back to majority a la carte or something like that would just make no sense whatsoever for
yeah,
them. So I was never really worried about that, but I'm glad that they reaffirmed it, because obviously Game Pass is great, and I don't think there's really an argument against that. Um, so that was fine. I thought the decision not to name the games is weird. I mean, I get why they're doing it, probably because they're going to pop up somewhere with a multi-platform announcement, perhaps one or two at the a direct that's coming up, for example. There might be another state of play where something gets announced as well, and it pops up there, or they might just drop an announcement, one day in the week, and it might be directly from the teams involved announcing that it's going to Blob, wherever it's going.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think they're I thought it like generally pretty good. Obviously, they reaffirmed their commitment to hardware. That was good. Um, and Yeah, they definitely left the door open. I think the Verge interview with Phil Spencer afterwards, that was a bit more open than perhaps some of the answers were on the podcast itself. Obviously, that's very directed and very managed.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I thought it was really interesting overall. It's kind of a weird thing to watch in a way. You wouldn't think that would be that interesting to watch, but it was. So yeah, I don't know. What did you think? How did you think they dealt with the the big rumors that were out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. They kind of obviously intentionally covered a lot of those big, um, those big rumors. So the first, as you mentioned, being Game Pass day and date being changed. Obviously, they explicitly came out to address that. That
Mm,
wasn't just like an answer to a question. They'd obviously pre-planned to say that particular line. I think the hardware side of things is obviously another thing. There was this idea that Microsoft was all of a sudden going to come out the hardware business
yeah,
and go
weird
entirely
again.
multi-platform, which I think when you look at just the amount of money Microsoft make purely from having that as a platform, even
Mm,
with a much smaller user base on consoles sold compared to the other two, they still make a staggering amount of money from sales. Obviously, if you buy an Xbox game on an Xbox platform, they're not paying another. They're not paying Steam or Valve. They're not paying PlayStation for that. If you play Fortnite on an Xbox and you get the microtransactions, they get to cut that. So, and personally, never feared that the platform or the hardware platform was going to disappear. But I thought it was important that they came out and addressed that. But we are in like a really bizarre timeline right now where we're just a little over 3 years into this generation, and Sony just came out last week. It said the PlayStation 5's getting towards the tail end of its life cycle, and here's Xbox talking about next generation hardware so early as well. It's really bizarre to
mm,
to hear, I guess, both the PlayStation and Xbox kind of touch on that side
mm.
of things before the Nintendo Switch 2's even been
Yeah,
announced,
it was.
which is funny. So I think it was important that they got those two things out the way. I
Mm,
felt the overall presentation was good. Like I guess it was as good as it could have been because they couldn't come out and say, these are the only 4 games we're going to bring to other platforms because that was never going to be the case. I agree with you. That was a bit weird that they didn't announce them, but yeah, I guess look, there's a Nintendo Direct apparently going to be anytime now, and I suspect those games are going to show up there, and that's why they've got some agreement with Nintendo to have that announcement during that maybe.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, and I guess that was kind of it. They covered the main concerns that people had, but a lot of the other concerns they simply couldn't address, because a lot
Yeah.
of the other concerns is just this idea that Indiana Jones is going to come to PlayStation, and they obviously left that intentionally open. They specifically touched on Starfield and Indiana Jones, and they refused to rule out them ever coming to another platform. Um, but they kind of couldn't say anything else because they know that that's a possibility. Even if it doesn't happen, they know it's a possibility, and it will ultimately probably determine on how that game sells across PC and Xbox. Because what they've probably seen is just with the smaller Xbox user base is that they want to bring their games to more people, and you know, I don't necessarily blame them. I look at something like Hi-Fi Rush, one of my favorite games, if not my favorite game of last year, and it probably didn't sell particularly well. It obviously came to Game Pass day one. I suspect a lot of people who played it in Game Pass, myself included, and they probably see the kind of the critical reception to that game being really strong, and the
Yeah.
sales of the game probably not. So I can kind of understand why they would want to see other games like that reach other platforms and more people. And the same goes for something like Pentiment. You know, those single player games that maybe didn't sell particularly well, and then the other games that are rumored, Grounded, and Sea of Thieves, service games. You know, those types of games thrive on having a strong and big user base.
Yeah.
So it really does kind of make sense from that perspective. So yeah, honestly, I kind of expected fireworks. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe that was a bit naive of me. Part of me kind of expected fireworks because of the rumors, and then when I came out of it, I was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. I get it. Yeah, you know, it didn't surprise me in any way. But maybe that's largely down to how extreme the rumors got in the lead up to it. Whatever they announced was probably never going to feel as bad as maybe it could have, because you know it was a lot less than maybe what was rumored. So
Yeah.
yeah. On the subject of, I guess, Starfield and Indiana Jones, this is kind of where I think it really kicked off on Twitter, was the Xbox Era article, which was then backed
Yeah.
up by some people like Nate the Hate, about Starfield coming to PlayStation. Do you think those games are coming? Obviously, more. Actually, no. Let me rephrase that question first of all. And this is less of a question, more of a statement. But they're not stopping at these four. Are they? Like, they're starting with these four, but I think it's obvious, and I think they were fairly open about it. It's likely that more games are going to come, especially if these games perform and sell well on other platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Are those games going? I don't know. I think it's hard, isn't it? You know, obviously there were pretty big rumors that Starfield was being considered, and then Xbox Era came out and said directly that yes, it is coming. They're usually, I mean, they've always been pretty reliable for this stuff. I've always found Xbox Era, like, you know, say what you will about like any you know, perceived bias or anything like that, but in as far as when they put something out there, they're usually pretty accurate with it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that they, whatever they had, you know, was solid enough for them to say that. And I guess, I mean, Starfield, I probably do expect down the line for that to hit. I think the problem Microsoft had or have at the minute is that, at least in terms of like the aggressive you know, core of the community, of the Xbox community, you know, they have to do this in such a way that it's kind of like just kind of test the waters stuff and just do it steadily. Like, they're not going to get, they were never going to come out on Thursday and go, yeah, well, actually, you know, we're probably going to get to a position where everything that we make is coming out on other platforms other than Xbox and PC. Like, they're just never going to say that. Because they don't, you don't want to drive away your core customers. Just in the same way that when Sony, you know, started bringing games to PC, well, they weren't ever going to say, well, everything's going to come to PC eventually, or day and date, or anything like that. Like, it's a steady process. So, and in fact, Microsoft did this with when they were bringing games to PC. It was only quite steady initially, and then it's just day and date PC now. It's just taken for granted. So yeah, I think Starfield, yes. I don't know when that will come. but yes, I think they will see that there is a gap for that type of experience on PlayStation, for example, and it's a game that could fill that gap. Obviously, historically, Bethesda Game Studios games have sold pretty well on PlayStation
Yeah.
as well, so why not? Um, Indiana Jones, that's a more interesting one, as you say. I think that again that was one of the ones that was rumored to be considered, and I think they are still considering it. They'll just look, as you say, like they'll see how it performs, see how these 4 games do, and then see how that performs out of the gate, not just in terms of sales, but also in terms of uptick in Game Pass subscribers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, because that's probably an important influence in decision as well, not just actually how many it sells. Yeah, I think they'll wait and see. You know, they'll take it pretty slow. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, I mean, there was all sorts of rumors on there about Halo and Gears and all these other ones, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, can maybe one day, but like it's not going to be yet.
Yeah.
For those big franchises, I, if, it would just be madness to do that too quickly, right? Like for
Yeah.
those type of games. Yeah, I don't know. In a far flung future or a medium term future, is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? I don't think so yet, but we'll have
Yeah.
to wait and see.
The prospect of something like Halo, obviously being such a flagship franchise of Microsoft's going to another platform, is one that's hard to see. But at the same time, as someone who plays Halo, and personally, I don't think it has launch wars or the first 2 year wars aside, it's a game that I don't think has a player base that's worthy of the quality of the game at the moment.
Mm,
And I mean, 343 are kind of openly talking about the next Halo project now. So, you know, Halo Infinite's definitely the very tail end of its life now, unfortunately.
yeah.
But there is part of me that kind of thinks that a game like that being multi-platform, well, it's a live service game. You want it on as many devices, you want it on as many platforms as possible. You look at the success of a lot of these games. I mean, Helldivers 2, I said it on Twitter before. Um, no, I can't see it happening, but I think Helldivers 2 would do fantastically well on Xbox. I think they would have a huge hit on Xbox. Obviously, it's doing well without that. Undoubtedly,
Yeah.
it's doing well without it anyway. But I think games like that, live service games that do thrive off having a really strong, big user base, they should be on other platforms. So part of me is like, put Halo Infinite on PlayStation,
Yeah.
give it
Yeah.
access to other platforms where you know um, a game like that would probably. I mean, I don't know. Would Halo do well on PlayStation? Probably. I would like to think so.
Probably, yeah.
But regardless of
And it's a
anything,
free to play as well.
yeah. And it could easily go on PS4 as well, and then bang,
Yeah.
you've got 120 million or
Whatever.
whatever
Yeah.
additional potential players. I don't know how many MAUs PlayStation has these days, but there's a lot of PlayStations out there that would have access to it, and that's obviously the thing behind this entire. I was going to say shift. It's not really a shift, but I'll say shift for lack of a better term. But this shift in kind of direction by Microsoft, which is just getting their games and their software in front of more people. So, what I find interesting is just like, right, what is the end game? I know you talked about kind of like the future, and where do you think this will go? Where do you think we'll end up? And I guess what do you think would be acceptable again for lack of a better term in terms of where this ends up? Does Xbox as a platform still thrive if, say, Game Pass, they kind of said Game Pass will only exist on Xbox, which is
Yep.
a shift, because they have openly spoke about wanting to bring Game Pass to more platforms. They've kind of gone back on that, probably because those platforms won't let Game Pass on there, to be fair, but they have
Mm.
changed that. So Xbox hardware is the only place you can get Game Pass, obviously, except for cloud and PC.
Yeah.
Let's say a game like Starfield, Indiana Jones has, on average, a 6 to 12 month window of exclusivity, and then they start coming to other platforms. Do you think that's a good position for Xbox to be in? Do you think that's one that will harm them longer term, or do you think that's one that could maybe help the business and help get games out? Well, obviously it'll help get games out in front of more people, but is it one that will help them as the gaming division of Microsoft?
Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think is it a good decision or would that be a good decision? I think it whether that it depends on if that's a good decision for Microsoft in terms of the end result. And that's something we don't know because we don't know what analysis, and they will have conducted heavy amounts of this, but what analysis has shown up in terms of how that would impact their bottom line, basically.
Yeah,
What does that do to revenue, for example? Um, and I mean, if they look at it and go, well, yes, we may lose some people on the Xbox platform, but that's offset by greater software sales and ultimately more money, then they'll probably go, yeah, well, we don't care.
yeah,
To be frank, it doesn't matter to them as long as they're making more money. I think that's the ultimate point. Um, but I mean, there is something to be said that if you think about Game Pass, for example, which is really their focus still, um, we'll probably talk about the figures on that shortly. But
yeah,
the majority of people on Game Pass are still on Xbox, as in on the Xbox console. Obviously, there's a big proportion of those people on PC as well, but I'm pretty sure that most of it is on Xbox. And if most of it is on Xbox, then you don't really want to rock the apple cart too much
yeah,
because you don't want to move those people away from Game Pass. And I don't think those people would be necessarily en masse moved away from Game Pass just because games after 12 months go somewhere else, because ultimately the, the point of Game Pass is to save money,
yeah,
right? It's to get a lot for paying very little. Um but yeah, I yeah, I just think it's an interesting that would be an interesting approach. But you know, I mean that is literally the approach that Sony are doing now with PC, where
yeah,
it's 6 to 12 months, maybe. Well, I mean more in some cases, like some like Ghost of Tsushima and stuff, and Last of Us Part Two, very very strange timings. But for the most part, anything that's come out in the last few years now, you see about 6 to 12 months, and then it comes to PC. It doesn't seem to affect the sales of those games on that platform. Um, People still buy it. People buy it because they don't want to miss out when it launches, for example, and they're not willing to wait, like
yeah,
me. Far rather play some of these games on PC,
yeah,
but I'm not going to wait 12 months to play Spider-Man 2. Like,
yeah.
so,
And I think that's where
um,
kind of my question comes from is PlayStation have got this. I think they've got a good balance at
yeah,
the moment,
yeah, for now, yeah,
where they do seem to get like a bit of a second wind with some of these games. And as you say, it's not impacting or seemingly doesn't seem to be impacting
yeah,
PlayStation hardware sales in particular. They're still
mm,
obviously doing fairly well, and they're happy with that approach. So, is that one that could work for Microsoft in a different? Obviously, it would be different because they'd be bringing the games to PlayStation and Switch.
mm,
Actually, just a point from Jenna in chat. He says the games sell abysmally on PC. Do, I mean, I guess it depends on. I mean, we don't know what their expectations are for those
yeah. I
sales.
think that's the thing. Yeah,
But if what's the porting cost of a game on PC and how many sales does it make to make a profit on that? I suspect
yeah.
maybe not
It's
as
it's
much as you would think.
Yeah, well, the Insomniac leak showed that Spider-Man cost, I think the port for that for PC was 50 million, and I
Wow,
can't
okay, that's
remember.
a lot more than I expected, to be
It
perfectly
it is a
honest.
lot more than you'd
Yeah,
expect, so it's not like it's not a cheap
yeah,
thing, but then you only have to sell 2-3 million copies or something like
yeah,
that for it to be profitable. And I think the figures they had on Spider-Man, were, for example, and the first one were over 3 million. So that's still a success. I think, as you say, it's all around, well, what are their expectations of sales? Because yeah, if they bring, I don't know, Last of Us Part Two to PC and it sells 400,000 units, I very much doubt that would be considered a success. But if it sells 2 million, I don't know if that's a success or not, or 3 million or whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and it's all about what they consider a success. What is their metric for success in terms of, and that basically boils down to when does it turn a profit and how many copies did they need to sell to do that.
Yeah.
Um, which we don't know. It would be interesting. I do think they potentially do miss out on some sales. I don't know how many sales, but some sales from not putting their games day and date on PC, their single player stuff.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people who might otherwise have the game will buy it on PlayStation. And again, I don't think PlayStation particularly care about that point, but some other people will just like it's not the new hotness, you know what I mean? So they just
Yeah.
don't they might not really care. And also if you're bringing some of their games like I don't know, Uncharted 4 or games like that, these are a game in a long running franchise of which the rest of the franchise is not on PC. So they're never going to be uh they're not off to a great start in terms of
Yeah.
audience perception and stuff like that. And I mean for Microsoft, that they'll kind of, I guess, have the same problem to some extent with some of their games if they're putting them on other platforms. But other stuff like Hi-Fi Rush and stuff, new IP or first games in a franchise, I think that will work for them. Again, I don't know um how many they'll sell or how many they need to sell, but I can't imagine it's that much for a lot of these, at least for the games they've announced.
Yeah.
It's not really going to be that much, right? So Hi-Fi Rush, you could probably sell like combined 1 million across PlayStation 5 and Switch. It'd probably be quite successful.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll miss. Obviously they're not going to miss out on any sales by not doing it, by not having had that game day and date. But yeah, it's really difficult without knowing how they perceive all of these, all of these games and the future of where they're going and stuff like that. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's what I kind of find fascinating about this entire conversation is ignoring all the fanboy console war bullshit. There is a really interesting business argument either way.
Yeah.
I can see, and you're right. It'll ultimately boil down to what's the figure at the bottom of the spreadsheet, and in these many scenarios that they've got very well paid people likely kind of doing those calculations to determine which route they want to go. But what they're now going to have is genuine data of these games, which were previously exclusive, are now on these other
Mm.
platforms. What's the impact of that? What's the impact on Game Pass subscribers
Yep.
or hardware sales or whatever it might be? And obviously they're starting small, but then if they do
Yep.
turn to Starfield, maybe at the end of the year, they're going to have a bigger, I guess, game to make that analysis on as well. But I want to touch on a point that you made actually about kind of PlayStation's approach, which I can actually relate to myself as someone who hasn't played, say, The Last of Us.
Yeah.
I can play it on PC,
Have you not
but
played
but I haven't. But there's an element of truth to what you're saying, because at the same time, like, I know what happens
Yeah,
now.
well, true,
Now
true.
because
Yeah.
I've watched the
Yeah.
TV show and it was a very
Yeah.
faithful recreation of
Yeah.
it. So I've got access to it, but I've chosen not to buy, even though I could probably get it for 15 quid or something.
Yeah, it
some
won't be
like
that much
CD
now.
keys. So you're right. The fact that game has been out for so long, that to me that discourages me from picking up the game on PC. So you're probably right. There is that element of they're losing out on some sales, but similar to what we're talking about Microsoft, they've probably done the analysis that says bringing the games to PC would impact maybe their hardware sales,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
their potential user base for all of their first party games at that point. But then you look at the success they've had with Helldivers 2. Obviously, Helldivers 2, Last of Us Part 1 and 2,
Yeah.
vastly different games.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But you see the success that they're having with this. And I wonder if it's only one game, I appreciate, but I wonder if this does have any impact on their thinking of their approach to bring games to PC. And
Mm.
they kind of spoke a little bit about it during the recent financials. Again, that just came out last week, where it did sound like they wanted to try and leverage PC a bit more to try and reach um, more customers. But again, that doesn't come as any surprise. I mean, you can go back to interviews in the past with Jim Ryan, who has openly spoken about the fact that a game selling 10 to 20 million copies, he doesn't want that. He wants games reaching a far bigger audience than that. But obviously, an attach rate of 20% or whatever it might be is great. But obviously, 20% of 100 million maybe isn't quite what they want, even if those figures
Mm.
are great. I mean, look at something like Mario Kart. You know, what's that at 50, 60 million or
Yeah, over
something
60 million now.
bonkers
Yeah.
now. So yeah, they're both in kind of an interesting position where they want their games to reach more people so they can generate more money, but they are kind of just in a strange position where they've got the potential of upsetting their existing customer base by making any drastic changes to their existing business model. So yeah, I
Yeah.
do find the whole thing just fascinating.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean the PC stuff's really interesting for Sony as well. Just because the games that really sell well on Steam, for example, it tends to be your co-op, type experiences,
Yeah,
or like look at Palworld recently, and so survival games and that stuff. So not everything that you bring over there will be do gangbusters just because has access to an absolutely gigantic audience. Like it's not the way it
yeah,
works. It just depends on what type of game it is. But Helldivers, I mean, it won't change Sony's approach to service games, because they have already committed essentially to all their service games. I mean, day and date with
yeah,
PC, because it just makes sense to, as has been said a million times, to have a bigger audience. Um, but yeah, I guess Microsoft's games, some of their single player games, they might look at that and go, well, actually, these type of games are very successful on PlayStation and Switch. They do very well, and they would do well if they were day one. So their determination might be a bit different than
yeah.
Sony's, but I suspect Sony will. I mean, the day where they go a day and date with PC with everything is definitely coming. I just don't know when
Yeah,
that day is.
I agree.
I'll be very happy when that day does come, by the way.
Yeah,
But but
yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know when it is.
something like God of War being day on
Oh, that'd be good.
PC, yeah,
Yeah.
or the next Insomniac game. Yeah, I agree. I can see that coming, and the success I've seen with Helldivers, I think, will contribute some way to it. Again, I appreciate vastly different games to the ones that we're speaking about,
Yeah.
but I think they'll test it one day with
Oh yeah.
a
Yeah, for
single
sure.
player type game, and they'll maybe see what sort of appetite there is, because there are people out there who um, only play on PC. They don't want to buy a console as well as
Yeah.
their PC, and they'll then have access to it. So I just want to touch on a couple of things that are in chat. Appreciate Stubbs and Jenna. They've been chatting quite a bit there, so I appreciate that, gents. And actually, I think Stubbs raises a pretty good point, and I think I would agree on it, and I'll probably try to touch on it a little bit. Where he says, I believe a lot
Yeah.
of the multi-platform is due to Game Pass not growing and pretty much failing. I bet Microsoft wants and needs at least 52 to 100 million subs. So I guess to touch on that point, I think they've previously said, and this might have came out during the FTC leaks, that they wanted 100 million Game Pass subscribers by 2030. They're
Yeah.
obviously nowhere near that and are highly unlikely to hit it. Part of obviously this was this business update was announced that they've now got 34 million Game Pass subscribers, but that does include the transition from people who were previously Xbox Live Gold over to Game Pass Core. And if I remember rightly, the last number that they released was 25 million subs, and that
25.
was about
Yeah.
2 years
2
ago, I
years
think
ago.
now. So,
Yep.
I mean, if you had said 25 to 34 million, I would have said that was probably okay. But I think with it also including Xbox Live Gold conversions,
Yeah. It's
I actually think
not good.
that's not good at all.
Yeah.
You could probably make the argument that it's not good even if that wasn't the case.
Mm.
And I think part of that to Stubbs's point is, I really don't think they've seen the growth of Game Pass on PC as much as they want. Although they have said, that's where they're seeing the growth. I
Yeah.
suspect they're not seeing the growth that they want. And ultimately, I don't. I think they had too big a bet on cloud. I think they expected more people to maybe take up Game Pass as a cloud only option.
Mm.
To play it on whatever they want. And I don't think they've really seen that take off. And again, during the FTC trial and things like that, we got some really interesting tidbits about cloud and the fact that they had stopped development on it. Obviously, I can't remember the exact phrase that they used. I think they had stopped kind of investing in it in a way that they previously had because they hadn't seen that growth. And they spoke about Fortnite not really moving the needle when they brought that to cloud gaming. And then going back to hardware sales, Xbox Series is rumored to be at about 25 million, 30 million consoles at this point. If they've got 34 million Game Pass subscribers and only 30 million Series consoles available, like their growth for Game Pass is going to be significantly harmed by the lack of console user base. Because to your point, Luke, that's where they're seeing most of the Game Pass subscribers. So the lack of hardware is significantly harming the growth of Game Pass. They've probably completely saturated the console market for Game Pass now. I mean, the attach rate is probably astronomically high for Game Pass. I think it's probably something like 70, 80% or something stupid like that. Maybe. I mean, that might be a bit high, or is it? I mean,
it'll certainly be well saturated on their consoles if you combine. Well, I guess if you're combining Xbox One as well, then obviously it won't be that high. But I suspect if you just took the Series consoles, it's probably very high in terms of saturation on that, which is where all their growth's coming from. Because at this point, especially, not many people are obviously going to be interested in longer term keep subscribing on, say, Xbox One, because their games aren't coming to Xbox One anymore. That's we're done on that. But yeah, very high.
Yeah, I wonder what their MAU is across Xbox One at this point. I can't imagine it being particularly high. Although I was playing Halo with some guys the other day and I learned he was still playing on Xbox One, which I found fucking madness. Just get a Series S, man. Like,
just get anything. Play on cloud. It's probably better at this point than
I think he's playing like online Halo at 30 FPS. I think it's 30 FPS on Xbox One. So which is madness. Just get a Series S. So I can't imagine the Xbox One MAUs is particularly high. I imagine a lot of those people have already transitioned to Series consoles. There will be obviously some left over, but I think it's fair to say they've saturated that. So without the growth in hardware, without the growth in cloud, they're kind of relying entirely on PC for that growth of Game Pass. But I think that's proven to be a tougher nut to crack than maybe they had ultimately expected. It's obviously a completely different user base. So Stubbs, no 100 million was, I'm pretty sure, was part of the leaks. I say leaks, I think it was official documentation from the FTC case, where the target was 100 million by 2030. So they're obviously some way off that, and that will be partly to do with this decision. Like, okay, we're not going to hit these Game Pass subscriber figures, so how can we reach more people? Might not be through Game Pass, but if they're not getting the subscriber revenue in, then they need to get the software sales revenue in. And where they're going to get that from? Well, hey, Switch and PlayStation have the best part of 200 million console owners at this point between Switch, PS5. What's Switch at now? 130.
130ish.
PS5's over 50 now, I think. So there's 180 million additional people that might buy your game, even if you are giving up a cut to those platforms. So
I think just on the Game Pass point, I think people should have known it wasn't doing well when they untethered some of Satya Nadella's compensation from the metric, and then just stopped reporting on it. Because as we know with Microsoft, once they stop reporting on a metric like console sales, for example, they're probably not doing too well, which is why they don't want to report it. So yeah, which is a real shame for Game Pass. I mean, it's fine. I mean, look, that's a sustainable service. They've said that before, right? They at present they can sustain it,
Yeah.
which is great. And as long as they can manage to retain the people who are already on it, I think they'll be fine. But they do need they're going to have some growth. It's very difficult for them though, because as you say, it's mainly tethered to consoles. They're not really selling many of those, and they've saturated the ones they've sold. And then on PC, it's very difficult to get people, even if you're offering a great deal, which Game Pass is,
Yeah.
to boot up, the fucking Xbox Game Store on PC, which is
Yeah.
abysmal, and have that, when people are so tethered to Steam, especially, it's a really difficult ask,
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily their fault, because it's not as if Microsoft have gone out and not tried to put everything they have into this, because they have. I mean, they're putting, even independent of their own games, they've put some massive deals in there for third party stuff as well, which has been fantastic. But it's just it's very difficult for them, and they can't put it on other platforms. So as you say, the growth areas were PC, which is a massive audience, but in terms of a captive audience, quite low, because most people won't engage with it just prima facie, like they just won't go
Yeah.
to it. And then the other one, as you say, was cloud or mobile or another device, miscellaneous device. But then there's not really much growth there either, because the whole bet on cloud stuff is once again about 10 years too early. So they've been stuck in a difficult position, which I think basically explains exactly why they're doing what they're doing now,
Yeah.
because they need to make money some other way.
Yeah, I think the cloud thing is interesting. I'm someone that actually uses cloud gaming,
Yeah, I
believe
know.
it or not.
Yeah.
I'm playing Persona 3 at the moment, almost exclusively on the cloud on my Steam Deck. Um, Obviously, it's a game that is, you know, is very well suited to cloud, because they don't have to worry about latency and things like that. Um, but I do think that there is potential there. I think the issue that Microsoft has there now, though, is they've obviously stopped investing in it. I've spoken about on Twitter many times when I've tried to play cloud gaming. It's like, you've got to wait 15 minutes. It's like, no, I'm not waiting 15 minutes to play a fucking game. I'll go and play something else. But the quality of the service, I think, is very quickly being overtaken by Nvidia's GeForce Now service. So
I can't understand why they still haven't got higher resolution streaming options on it.
yeah,
Like, I just fundamentally don't understand that.
I guess it's cost. Well, I guess
It must be.
it's got to be cost, and but that's what I mean. They've obviously stopped investing in it. So if you're not going to improve that service, how are you going to attract more people to a service that weren't attracted to it in its current state, when you've got GeForce Now offering basically virtual 4090s and 4K 120 gameplay, and their latency seems to be excellent. My experience with GeForce Now wasn't great, but that was on the free model, so obviously the paid models will be significantly better. So if they're not going to invest in that, how are they going to see growth there? And then again, that comes back to the point, they're kind of then hedging their bets on PC essentially at this point with their storefront wars. They're unlikely to be successful there. I mean, you've only got to look at EGS and the challenges of, they're basically just fucking giving away things on EGS. I've got 250 games on EGS. I've played 0 games on EGS. So you've only got to look at the struggles that Epic have had with that to see how challenging it is. And one thing I think they might consider, maybe they are considering, I wonder if there will ever be some sort of integration between Steam and Game Pass. I believe EA Play has an integration with Steam, if I remember rightly. I might have to double check that. Something's telling me I'm now doubting myself. I'm pretty sure something was announced where essentially you can access your EA Play titles through Steam. I might Google that. Let me Google that.
Yeah, actually. Maybe. Yeah.
I don't want to be filling people full of shit. EA Play Steam. Let me check. Yeah, EA Play now available on Steam. July last year. You can EA players can play select new release EA games for up to 10 hours. You can play your games for obviously 20 quid a year for EA Play or £4 a month. So you can access EA Play games through
Steam.
Through Steam now. Would Microsoft be able to come up with some? I imagine the financials involved would be pretty big.
Yeah.
But would Steam or Valve and Microsoft ever be able to come up with some agreement that would allow something similar? And I think if that did happen, if they could make that work, I think that could potentially see a bit of explosion in growth for Game Pass on PC, potentially at the very least. So
Stubbs, just to answer your question, RE6, I'm pretty sure there is a 60 FPS mode on Series X. Like, I'm pretty certain.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I've got no idea.
But yeah, I mean the Steam stuff's interesting, but I think that's and I'm not I might go and try the EA Play thing to see how that works because I haven't experienced it firsthand. But the Game Pass on Steam would be really difficult, I think, for multiple reasons. One is that there is I don't think there's any way on God's earth that they would be able to convince Valve to put the service as it is on Steam if it meant, for example, that you can access anything that's on Game Pass through Steam, because that would then include all these third-party games.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of interrupt you a little bit there, I guess I can only see that going if it was first party only.
Yeah. So if it's first party, maybe, yeah, because I guess, but the problem then becomes, and this is again, there's all these kind of little nuances, but the problem then becomes there has to be some benefit for Valve to do that. And what's the benefit? Well, it's money, obviously. Yeah. It has to be money. It has to be enough money to compensate for every conceivable title that Microsoft would put on there, and then allow a Game Pass user to go through, through Steam and just access it if they're a Game Pass subscriber. Not to mention all the admin costs of actually facilitating that and how that would work, etc. And I guess then the question becomes, well, even if Valve were to, they say that's fine, on Microsoft, is it economical for Microsoft to subsidize that in terms of the service of Game Pass? Because then if it becomes a point where, okay, yeah, we've got some growth on PC, but actually, the cost of putting this, being able to subsidize this through Steam and giving Valve what they need to be able to do that, if that exceeds the actual growth in members that they would have from doing it, they just won't do it.
Yeah.
So, because then the service really doesn't become sustainable, because you're actually offering it to people who just don't want it.
Yeah.
You're paying a lot of money. So I think it's quite difficult. EA have obviously made it work, which is great.
Yeah. But their service is again vastly different because it lacks
vastly different. Yeah,
that day and date service. Nobody's similar to kind of what we're talking about PC. I don't want to say nobody because I have waited in the past, but not a lot of people are waiting to play. FIFA. Let's just use that or EA Sports.
Yeah, on Steam or whatever.
Yeah, people aren't waiting for that to go into EA Play, or a lot of people aren't. Yeah. They're buying that day one. Obviously, it comes to that service later. So I imagine the impact to Steam is, I mean, to be fair, FIFA's not even on Steam, so that's a bad example. But think of any game, it goes into service significantly later, so the impact is lessened. But for something like, trying to think, like Starfield, Starfield did extremely well on Steam.
It did well,
I believe.
Yeah.
So that's Valve getting a very nice cut of that very good performance. And you're right. What would it take to allow Steam to say, yeah, we'll forego that cut? It would have to be a similar cut from the Game Pass subscriptions. And then at that point, would Microsoft be comfortable giving that away? So
yeah. Yeah. So it's difficult. I think obviously Microsoft would love that, but it would have to um it would require Valve to want to do that, and would require some clever economics to make that actually feasible or
Yeah,
work for Microsoft and Valve, but mostly Microsoft. Even
yeah,
because even if Valve are willing to do it, it doesn't mean that Microsoft would.
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, yeah, they're just in a bit of a difficult position. I imagine. I mean, on PC, I think the big growth PC is a big growth area, or can be a big growth area for them. I just don't know how they break um that viewpoint of PC players of just being like, well, it's not on Steam,
Yeah,
because as you say, Epic have done like everything, given away just unbelievable amounts of games in high monetary value. They've had exclusives to EGS, and they've made a very small dent in
yeah.
Steam's market share, quote unquote, in that space. So if Epic is struggling, then Microsoft are also going to struggle to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it does raise the question is like, right, how does Game Pass grow? I think talking about subscriptions, I think one way maybe we could see Game Pass grow is more subscription offers. Now,
Yeah.
I saw the reaction when they rebranded Gold to Core and the confusion, even though I thought personally it made perfect sense,
Mm,
that caused. You know, I've always said that they really need to have a cloud only option.
mm,
Um, but if they're not investing in cloud, then that's probably pointless. So that really only leaves like, would they ever consider a first party only option? But I can't see that happening either because you can't make that any cheaper than Game Pass is anyway, because that's where the vast majority of your investment in Game Pass is
mm,
going. And obviously, they're paying publishers to bring their games on, but the expenditure is largely going to be on their own games that are going on that service, not third
yeah.
party. So I don't see that happening. So really, this kind of takes me on to the next point that I guess Sarah Bond touched on is right. Can they grow their hardware user base? Can they grow the number of Xbox console owners? Um, to facilitate that growth or facilitate growth on console more than we're seeing at the moment. Because I still find it bonkers that the series isn't selling better than the Xbox One. Like I think that's madness. I don't know how
I thought it
how
was
that's the case.
slightly ahead if like adjusted for time and stuff like that. I know
I
it's
thought it
not.
was tracking behind. It's close. You know,
Yeah, I think
at
it's
the very
either
least.
either side. It's
Yeah,
close-ish, isn't it? Even if yeah, so yeah, a bit of a moot point, but yeah, that is bizarre. I think that's just. I mean, look, like that that Xbox One generation just absolutely crippled
yeah,
Microsoft. It
it
crippled
did.
the brand of
Yeah,
Xbox. In hindsight, I think even more than people thought.
yeah,
Um, and they have never recovered from it in terms of their hardware sales.
yeah,
They had a good start to this generation, but um, that was because I think, being really honest, I think that was probably because you couldn't get a PlayStation console. And
yeah,
now that you can, since you've been able to, like you've seen the market completely shift,
yeah,
um, back to PlayStation. Um, and it's a real shame because I can't speak for the Series S, but the Series X is a really great piece of hardware. It's a great console. It's
yeah,
got a lot going for it, but and there's always been problems with Microsoft's advertising and stuff like that. It's not very good, not very consistent. They don't shove it in your face in a lot of places. They don't get a great deal of marketing for like some of the biggest games like PlayStation do. They have a real firm grasp on that in terms of that kind of stuff, which is why if Sony for example, get some marketing for GTA 6, right, then that's going to be even more pain for like an Xbox
yeah.
platform in terms of sales, because again, having that game associated with your console um is a big deal. I don't know if they will. I'm just saying if that were to happen, that would be that would be a lot of pain for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Um,
there's a very good chance that
fair
that's the
chance, yeah,
case. I think
yeah,
but there's also, I think there's an element at this point where they kind of don't have to. That game's going to sell better on
Oh
PlayStation
yeah, it
than
doesn't matter.
Xbox, you know.
Yeah, it
So
doesn't matter.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do find it, you know, fascinating when Sony does kind of go for these marketing deals. I know why they do it, but I also kind of feel like there's not too much benefit in them doing so, because you know, you look at game sales, they're going to sell better on PlayStation. You know, these
Mm.
third party games, just by virtue of there's more PlayStations out there. So do they have to? But they kind of want to hammer home to people that this is the place to play the biggest titles. You know, Grand Theft
Yeah.
Auto. They want to keep that up. And the Gina made a good
Yeah.
point earlier as well. You know, you talked about marketing. The Gina talked about things like in Europe where Xbox is, you know, the US
Yeah.
is, the Xbox is probably doing okay in terms of
Mm.
hardware sales. It's everywhere else where it's not doing particularly well. And the Gina touched on the fact that, you know, PlayStation sponsors things like Champions League, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is obviously massive in Europe. That PlayStation brand's been associated with the Champions League for as long as I can remember. So you see PlayStation everywhere. I saw a Forspoken billboard in my town not too long ago. Like, I only live in a little town, man. I don't live in London or something like that. I live in a town. I was taking my dogs for a walk, and there was a fucking Forspoken poster up there. I've never seen an Xbox
I don't think
anything.
that worked for him though. Sadly.
Yeah, I mean, that one maybe didn't pan out, but they still had it. They still had my eyes on it. And yeah, I've not seen anything related to Xbox. But to your point as well about the hardware itself, I agree. The Series X is a great piece of hardware. As a Series S owner, I personally think the Series S is a really good piece of hardware. Obviously, it's got its limitations. But I've never played a game on Series S and come away thinking, I wish I'd played that on Series X. Obviously, I know it will look and play better on Series X, but I've never come away, you know, regretting playing that game on the Series S. You know, before I got my PC, I was playing Halo at 120 FPS on my Series S a lot. So it is a capable piece of kit, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I find the Xbox One compared to Series hardware sales honestly a bit confusing, because I thought Series S was potentially a really good idea for Microsoft coming out of that generation to encourage other people, maybe PlayStation or Switch owners, to maybe come into the Microsoft or the Xbox ecosystem, because it was a cheaper entry point into it. And it's not quite panned out like that, unfortunately for them. So.
And I think the issue with that is that it goes back to the fumble on Xbox One, in that, as Phil Spencer has said, and I mean he's totally right when he says it was the worst generation to lose.
100%.
Because people, you might have excellent value propositions elsewhere, and they do with the Series S, but if you're trying to appeal to a PlayStation gamer who's pretty much only played on PlayStation 4 and build up a library and a friends list and stuff, you're not very little you're going to be able to do to convince them to go and invest into a different ecosystem.
Yeah.
Just in the same way. I mean, it's exactly the same with Steam and EGS. You're not going to be able to convince people. I mean, it's a bit different on PC because the access is there just for you, right? You don't have to buy some hardware for it. But even in that context, people don't go, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to start buying my games through EGS now. You know, that's the place to be, because it's like, well, I've got 200 games on Steam. Everything's here on Steam. It's great. Why do I want to go away? I'll go to like EGS. Like, I'll go to EGS because I want to play Alan Wake 2. It's only available there, right? So they can get me, but you know, Microsoft can't. Even with great, and again, people took the piss out of Phil when he said, well, you know, just because we have an 11 out of 10 game, it's not enough. Basically, were his words when he's talking about Starfield.
Yeah.
And people were like, well, of course it is. You know, like, you've got to create compelling software, and it's like, well, but that's just one part of the puzzle with this, right? They could have a series of 10 out of 10 games. They've had some very good games this generation, really good games, but you need more than that to be able to convince people to get in the ecosystem, particularly if they're coming from somewhere else. And it's not easy. Like, it's not. It was just a really bad generation for them to lose. It was a terrible one for them to lose.
I think you make a really good point there, Luke, about um, it not being enough, Starfield not being enough, and I think this all comes down to Microsoft's, I was going to say investment, I should say lack of investment in first party, especially during that generation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but but it didn't just impact that generation. You look at the beginning of the series launch, where were the first party games? It was meant to launch with Halo Infinite, it didn't,
mm,
and the first party output simply hasn't been good enough for Microsoft for a fairly long time. That's obviously why they've invested in purchasing first party studios, um,
yep,
but we're still not at a point where we're truly seeing the fruits of that. You know, we've had Starfield,
no,
great, but we've also had Redfall. What they've not had is consistent quality first party / exclusive output um, to entice people across, because one game isn't enough. It could be the best
yeah,
game in the world, and then that simply wouldn't be enough, because people are on PlayStation not just because of The Last of Us, they're because of Last of Us, Uncharted, um, Horizon, God of War. They've got a suite of first party IPs that people want to play on PlayStation. And what I find
mm,
interesting about this whole thing is they're at a point now where they do have the first party studios, and they're, you know, we're close to the likes of, oh, I say close, I hope we're close to the likes of Fable. We're not too far from Hellblade. Um,
mm,
they did fumble with Halo, but you know, next Gears of War is coming out. They've got Forza Horizon, which is fantastic motorsport.
yeah,
Unfortunately, they fumbled that a little bit as well. Perfect Dark. They've got a lot on the horizon, and I wonder how things would turn out if they just waited and saw
yeah,
what the impact of having a consistent first party / exclusive output would have on sales.
mm,
But ultimately, this is Microsoft, and they don't want to wait. They
yeah.
want and need that revenue ASAP, you know. So
Yeah, and I don't even know if they would like, because people made that point, and I think it's a valid point, but I don't even know if that would make a difference in terms
yeah,
of the
maybe
hardware
not.
sales.
Maybe
Because
not.
again, it's not even it's not even now about, do you have compelling software on your system? It's about, well, a high proportion of players are, if not stuck, willingly remain on a system and don't branch out because they are casual gamers and they don't really care about other games. They only care about a very small subset of games. And if they can get them where their friends are and they can play with their friends all the time, and they can pay for their PlayStation Plus, let's say, then they don't want to pay anything else. Like they're pretty happy with that.
Yeah,
Um, it's difficult. And then even if Microsoft do manage to compel people to invest in the ecosystem, well, some people might just go, well, I'm just going to go on PC, aren't I? So, or
yeah,
like, not everybody will, but they might not choose to go to a console. Um,
yeah.
Although they
That's
might
fair.
choose to do cloud. I mean, I know it's a small amount of people, but they might choose to do that. So it's just a bit. They're just in a very tricky position. I think that's the problem. That there are lots of things they could do to try and improve Xbox hardware sales, but absent of something pretty radical like drastically reducing the price or drastically reducing the price of Game Pass or something like that, I don't think anything is really going to significantly move the hardware needle for them. Um, which is just the way it is. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just, I'd say, go back to the Xbox One generation. Just they just really buggered them.
and that's ultimately what leads us to this conversation. You know,
Yeah,
if they don't have that hardware user base, then they still want to sell these games.
yeah. So let's put
They're
them
going,
on
yeah, let's
where
put them
where
where
people
people
have a lot
are.
of hardware.
You
Yeah,
know,
where people
because
are. Yeah, it makes sense.
I find the argument sometimes where people say, "Oh, well, I'm just going to play the games on PC," and they say that as some sort of like slight towards Xbox, and they're like, and
Yeah,
but Microsoft are like, great.
yeah. You spend the
When
money.
they when
Yeah,
they say kind of Xbox customers are people on PC, on cloud, on console, like part of that obviously is marketing BS, but there's also an element of truth. if you're buying games on whatever platform, or if you're subscribing to Game Pass on PC rather than console, they don't necessarily care that you don't own a console at that point if they've got you as a customer. Um, but going back to our earlier point, obviously they need the hardware to kind of grow those subscribers. So it's a bit of a
Yeah.
double-edged sword.
So,
But if you're if
yeah.
you're someone that is purchasing their games or is subscribed to Game Pass, and you think, well, I'm just going to get it on PC, that's good.
That's great.
That's
Yeah,
kind of
from
what
Microsoft, yeah.
Microsoft want,
Yeah.
And let's imagine a world where they don't do Xbox hardware. I don't think we'll get there, and obviously we'll touch on that next, I guess. If they're selling 10 million copies of Starfield across Steam and PlayStation, well, they're still selling 10 million copies of games, but I guess the pain there for them is they're not getting that Fortnite cut. They're not getting the
Yeah.
microtransaction cut,
Yeah.
which is obviously a significant revenue source. But they're still generating a lot of revenue. Hardware, they don't make money on hardware. I imagine the R&D costs on something like the Series consoles were astronomical. They're not like Nintendo. Nintendo seemingly make at least a small amount of profit
Yeah.
on
Oh,
on every
definitely.
console
Yeah.
sold. Microsoft don't. They've been open about that. I think the Series S they lose a lot of money on each one sold, but they call that back through other means. So, there may be a world where they say, well, we don't want to do that R&D on an Xbox and sell each unit at a loss if we've got access to hundreds of millions of other customers via other means. But I don't think we'll get that. But I can understand why they might think like that. So, on the hardware point, though, look, they did reaffirm that we are going to get new hardware. They said they were going to speak about it this year. I imagine
Yes.
that's going to be kind of the Series S refresh. That was part of the FTC documents, potentially an all digital Series X. But then they also kind of committed to future hardware. And I know you loved Sarah's phrasing of this, and I can't remember the exact quote, but they basically said it's going to be the largest technical leap between generations ever. So, I mean, look, I didn't ever expect us not to get a next Xbox, but as I said earlier in the show, I did find it fascinating that they're openly talking about next generation hardware so soon. But considering everything we've just said about the challenges from a hardware standpoint, what does the next generation of consoles look like for Xbox? Do you think, are they just going to go down the same route? Are they going to go 2 SKU? There's rumors of handhelds. Do they just go super premium high end? Or do they have the multiple SKUs that they kind of got at the moment? What do you think that hardware outlook looks like for Microsoft going forward? And is there anything that you feel that they could do to move that needle?
Yeah, again, a difficult question for them. I'm not really sure of what their approach will be. I think the low end, high end bit hasn't clear. I mean, in terms of sales, hasn't worked for them. Like that's clear. So I don't think we'll get two SKUs that are consoles, one more powerful and one less, because they'll probably want to try something new. So I think the handheld rumor is feasible to me, and I could see them doing that as having a powerful piece of hardware as a dedicated box and then a handheld system. You do run into a lot of issues doing that, which are some of the issues they've had this gen, because even with tech advances, um, they're still gonna there would still be a considerable power gap between a dedicated box and a handheld. That's a hybrid. There's still going to be a pretty big gap, arguably potentially a bigger gap than there is
Absolutely.
now. So again, they're running into that. That's a problem all of itself. And I see them. I just don't know how much. I know this sounds weird. I don't know how much they really care now about trying to compete with Sony in terms of their hardware and the cost of their hardware in particular. So I could see them putting out maybe some powerful piece of dedicated hardware at the very least that maybe costs a bit more.
Yeah.
than you would expect. Maybe, like 550, 600, something like that, which ordinarily would be a bit of a death knell, but they wouldn't be looking to try and aggressively, sell hardware anymore, like because their priorities are shifting. The
Yeah.
handheld one's really interesting, with a hybrid. I think that could be super cool tech. Like they could make something. I have absolute confidence they can make something really good in terms of capability. Um, you see that in the PC space, especially with everything that's come out there. Like that tech has come on really significantly, and in a
Yeah.
couple of years with some proprietary stuff, yeah, it could be really impressive. Um, but again, I just don't know how would that work in terms of development with their own studios. Like it's
Yeah.
really difficult. Like it's difficult to judge that stuff.
The
Um,
approach of maybe high end and portable, you spoke about the gap between X and S.
yeah,
If you do go that high end approach and pair it with a lower end handheld, well, you're just
yeah,
increasing the gap between the performance gap between those SKUs. And regardless of whether you necessarily agree with it or not, there have been concerns over things like, I think memory bandwidth is the biggest concern over the
mm,
Series S, more so than anything else. But I guess that's just going to be even worse, if you've got an even
yeah,
bigger delta between the two pieces of hardware. So yeah, do they go three and have sort of a more traditional in the middle?
yeah. And
But
then it
then
just gets
you're talking about, and then honestly, the thing that worries me at that point is what the fuck are they going to name it?
yeah, exactly, yeah,
If you
yeah.
go
Like,
for
what do
like
you
three
do?
three
Yeah,
SKUs, I do find the rumors around a handheld fascinating, especially as someone really enjoying the Steam Deck at the moment. But like the
mm,
gap for me with the Steam Deck is just not having access to Game Pass games that are natively
yeah, yeah,
on the
yeah.
device. And that's the only thing that really at the moment would tempt me to one of the others, like the ROG Ally or the Legion Go or the Claw, the MSI one I think it's
Mm,
called. But you're right, there's
mm,
been really good advancements there. Um, but then it also kind of begs the question around, okay, who do they partner when it comes to hardware? Obviously, PlayStation and Xbox have been with AMD for a while now, but Switch is with Nvidia, and they've got obviously, or Nvidia, sorry, obviously have the DLSS tech, which could work quite well on maybe on a handheld to help with that performance difference. Or do they, part of the rumors, or part of the FTC leak, sorry, I should say, was they were maybe considering going with ARM, which is
yeah.
would be fascinating to,
Interesting.
and obviously
Yeah.
ARM is all about efficiency, but then we've seen the performance Apple have been able to get out of those their own ARM. It is ARM that Apple uses, isn't it? I believe for
Don't
it's
know.
their own chip, but I think it's based on
Yeah, yeah. It's their
ARM
own
tech.
proprietary chip, but
Yeah,
yeah. I think they use ARM to help them develop it. Maybe.
yeah, and you see what they're
Yeah.
able to get out of that hardware.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not quite there for games just yet, but purely from a performance standpoint, obviously it's
Yeah. It's very
very
impressive.
yeah.
Very, very
Um,
impressive.
so it just from that from a tech perspective, it begs the question. Okay, depending on where they go, who do they partner with? What do they use? Could we see them partner with Nvidia and somehow make an Nvidia based solution? Did the
I'd
original
love that.
Xbox work with Nvidia? I believe
Yeah,
it
it
did,
was
didn't
Nvidia. Yeah, it
it?
was Nvidia GPU. Yeah.
So could they do that? And then could we see obviously a performance difference between future PlayStation hardware and Xbox hardware purely based on things like DLSS?
Mm,
Something that or ray tracing in particular, something that obviously AMD really struggles with at the moment. So yeah, I find that side of things fascinating as well. I imagine it'll be a while
mm.
before we hear any of that, mind obviously, but it is interesting that they're talking about it already.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'd love for them to go with Nvidia. I just don't think they will. Probably be too expensive for
Yeah,
for the ultimate sell through they could get on it.
yeah. I
Obviously,
guess they would have to go for like because Nvidia. I guess Nvidia do have APUs because obviously,
yeah, yeah,
but
they do.
do they have APUs powerful enough to? They obviously can do the switch, but do they go? I'm not too sure if you know. Do they go
Yeah,
powerful
no,
enough
that
to? They do.
yeah, they. I mean,
Okay.
they have. That their APUs are very very powerful. The Tegra stuff is extremely powerful. The
Okay.
new gen Tegra stuff has all the feature set that the RTX series has ray tracing, DLSS support,
Okay,
tensor
interesting.
cores.
So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, all like it has. It's full bells and whistles, but it's expensive.
Yeah,
Obviously, I mean, when Nintendo launched the Switch, they had Beyond the Tegra X1 ready for a platform, but obviously Nintendo's Nintendo, so they're like, well, we don't need that. Like, we
yeah,
just need Tegra X1. And in fact, it was a slightly downclocked
yeah,
Tegra X1. It's not even like full spec. So yeah, they different things for Nintendo, but Microsoft would absolutely. I mean, they would need like a full spec, Tegra whatever, with all the features that could bring, because they'd be in, their studios would need to work on it, and they'd have to have some, you know, considerable crossover with than a dedicated
yeah.
console device. But yeah, that's why I just got. But that's expensive, and again, it's that point of there's got to be a real cost balance for Microsoft. Of how much investment do they put into the hardware, knowing potentially it's not really going to sell that much.
Yeah, and
So
or how they price it, because if you know it's not going to sell much, you can price it accordingly to make sure
yeah,
you make a profit on every unit sold. But at that point, the more expensive you make it, the less you'll
less
probably
you're going to
sell it,
sell.
because the less
Yeah,
appealing it is. And then you've also got
yeah,
concerns around things like backwards compatibility. I'd imagine
yep,
switching from
yep,
AMD to that, and obviously that's a big thing for
yeah.
Microsoft. It has been for some time now. You know, the backwards compatibility between um, different devices. So yeah, Stubbs is just
It's a
asking
bit
the
of a
chat.
pickle.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a good way just to explain the position Microsoft's in at the moment.
Yeah,
Generally, just they're in a bit of a
generally a
pickle. Yeah.
bit of a pickle. Yeah,
But Stubbs says, could an Xbox handheld be a Steam partnership with Game Pass included? I guess that kind of just goes back to the conversation we had just about Game Pass and Steam integration in general,
yeah.
ignoring the handheld conversation. But I guess the question really would be, Stubbs, I think, is if it's an Xbox handheld, is it just Windows? Like, is it Windows in the background, in the same way that Steam has Linux in the background, where it's a
Mm.
Xbox front-facing UI and you buy all your games through there, but there's nothing stopping you from loading it to Windows in the background and then loading Steam or AGS or other loaders. But then they don't they won't necessarily want you to do that, because then you're buying the games through another platform, not theirs. They're not seeing a cut of a game sale on Steam through an
Yeah.
Xbox handheld, for example. So I'd imagine it would be a Windows-based custom UI. Um, sorry, so I meant with it being Steam Deck with an official Xbox deal with Steam. Yeah, I mean, I think again that just goes back to that conversation we had around how could they make that work and how unlikely I guess that seems. So
Yeah, it'd be difficult as well because if yeah, if you're talking about like the existing Steam Deck, for example, but the primary difficulty is that it runs on Proton on
yeah,
Linux. So actually integrating the Game Pass backend, which is all Windows based, is really hard. Like, so
yeah,
that's why it's really difficult to get that working. It's much easier on like a Legion Go or whatever, because it's just Windows.
yeah.
So you can just get it going straight away. That's easy. It's just like a PC.
But then that
Difficult with
introduces
Steam.
its own challenges because it's Windows on
Yeah.
a 8-inch screen or whatever. And I
Yeah.
think
And then,
that's one of the things
yeah.
that Phil touched on in one of those interviews, is they're working on that handheld experience from a
Yeah.
Windows
Yeah.
perspective, because they recognize that I think one of the things that Steam does really well is just the UI.
Mm,
And I think that Ally and Go and things like that, they struggle with that sort of thing. So, um,
100%. 100%.
yeah, but I would love to see another handheld. I'd love to see PlayStation do
Mm.
another handheld as well. I still remember.
They've already got a handheld, bro. It's the
It's not.
the
It's not,
Portal.
it's not you know, it is. If they bloody introduce a cloud streaming option for that, I could see
I
them
know,
doing
yeah, then
that.
it'd be actually quite, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I've got one, and it's a really like it's actually quite for the limited use case, it's good.
yeah,
Like it's a good device. But then I'm like, you know, I, I- I'm like, why can't it's so stupid that I can't take this on holiday because I know for a fact that, hotel Wi-Fi, whatever, is going to need a login portal, and it
Yeah,
has
and
no
it's got no browser.
functionality.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it has no
I think they'll
functionality to
update that.
facilitate that.
I
They
think they've got to
surely
update it.
will.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then just update it for they've got a good cloud infrastructure, Sony. Like on PS Plus, I think it's on in premium, right? I think it's on premium. But they like it's there. Like why can't one of their devices take advantage of that? I don't understand. And it's
yeah,
it's purely a software thing. It's the hardware's there in
yeah,
the
yeah,
chip. So in the device as it is, so it's just silly. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like it'd be cool if Sony went back to actually doing a dedicated handheld. But again, the motivation, I guess, is just really different for PlayStation. I mean, that could. I'm sure they look at it now and go, that could be very in a post-Switch era. That
yeah,
could be a very successful device. There's absolutely no reason. If the PS Portal can sell out and continue to remain sold out, there's clearly a demand on the PlayStation side
yeah,
for handheld devices. So they must look at that and go, well, this is actually, you know, a potential thing, but it just do they put the money in it? I think they're still really spooked by the failure of the Vita,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
which is
We
a
live in a
shame because
different
again,
world
yeah,
now.
live in a different
So
world, and that was a great piece of art. I mean, everybody agrees that that was a fantastic handheld, an amazing piece of hardware for the time. But it wasn't very successful. But as you say, we live in a different world. We transitioned away from back then. We were transitioning back to consoles, fully like kind of
yeah,
away from handhelds. And now, because technology's moved on, everybody's like, well, my phone can do all this. Like, it would be nice if I could take gaming on the go like that, and it's not on a phone. And we got to the place where we can do that now.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, again, I think it's just baby steps, isn't it? Not the game, but
Yeah.
that's what's happening. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know we're kind of going slightly away from the original
tangents.
topic here, but on the handheld front, I touched on Apple, what they're doing with their M chips now. Obviously, they've got
Yeah,
Death Stranding, Resident Evil running on phones and
no iPhone.
natively
Yeah,
at this point. So they've shown what that hardware
with
has the
with no
potential to do.
active cooling either.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
basically no active. That's just all passive on a
Yeah.
relative, a small battery, in by comparison to what's actually intensively running on it. So that's impressive in its own right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the whole hardware landscape over the next few years is going to be fascinating. It starts with the Switch 2, which is potentially either later this year, maybe early next year, but it's not too far. It's going to be interesting to see what they're able to do. I think it's fair to assume that they're going to stick with the same platform, as in a Switch-like platform where you can take it handheld, you can dock it, but it's going to be interesting to see what they're able to do at a hardware level, and how they're going to be able to close the gap to PlayStation. I mean, not that they necessarily
Mhm.
need to, they've proven that with Switch, but I'm still going to be interested to see how that performs at that level. And then next year, I believe, is when the PS5 Pro is rumored to come out, so it's going to be interesting to see that. And then, because with Microsoft talking so openly about next gen hardware, I'm really curious when we're going to see that
Mhm.
next piece of hardware. Could we see it as early as 2026, which would be quite short compared to previous generations? Or is it going to be 2027, 2028, or maybe beyond? But I could see a world, especially in where Microsoft don't go for a Pro upgrade on the Series consoles. I could see a world where maybe their next gen hardware does come in earlier than expected. So we get a PS5 Pro 2025, and then maybe a Xbox whatever 2026, 2027, and then maybe the PS6 is 2020. I can maybe see that, and then you've
Yeah.
got three platform haulers basically on completely different trajectories when it comes to their hardware and their platform, and then how will that impact people's buying habits, and how will cloud feed into that, and how will Game Pass? Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating to see how things are gonna pan out.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure Xbox want to come ahead of PlayStation. They want to get ahead of them in terms of next gen hardware. They're probably trying to harken back to the 360 era
Yeah,
again because you just have a big platform, hardware head start. So that may influence people. or some people to invest in your platform. And yeah, it'd be very. I mean, if that happened, I don't think I think Sony will know about this, and I don't think they'll budge because they can't budge because that that their hardware means a lot more to them than just to Microsoft at this
Yeah, yeah,
point because they are the. I mean, they're not even the hardware leader, but they just sell a lot of hardware.
yeah. And we know
Um,
that they make profit on their hardware now. I believe they've come out. They got to a point where their hardware is profitable as well. I
yeah,
believe.
or very close.
Yeah,
And certainly, again, they definitely recoup that once you sell a game or whatever or a subscription. Um, but yeah, that would be interesting. So that there could conceivably be a time where Microsoft are launching a next gen console, a year and a half before Sony get into it, and then you've got Switch 2, which exists in its own timeline of hardware. Like it's not really
yeah.
competing with,
But then
it's like the
if
next
there
gen
is a
Switch,
handheld,
but yeah,
then
yeah,
they become even bigger, like are closer
yeah,
competitors again at that point. If they
yeah,
both
yeah,
got
yeah,
handheld gaming devices, um,
yeah,
the that I mean they compete regardless. I always found that argument about whether Nintendo and
yeah,
Xbox compete.
yeah, yeah, 100%, yeah,
Fascinating. They do, even just from a your attention or your time, they compete.
yeah,
But if they've both got handheld devices, even though they'll work slightly differently, I can't imagine
mm,
Xbox doing like a dockable device.
it's
That they would
strange, isn't it?
likely be two SKUs, but they would still be competing even closer at that point. And then yeah, the whole thing is just fascinating. I'm really curious to see how it pans out. But we're likely, you know, years away from seeing that eventually play out. Even if the Switch does come later this year, um, we're still far away from PS5 Pro hardware or next generation consoles from PlayStation and Xbox. So yeah, I think we're in an interesting time. I think to kind of wrap things up and take it back to the original topic, Luke. Um, Coming out of this business update, as somebody who plays Xbox games,
Yeah,
you're a Game Pass subscriber, aren't you? I
yeah,
believe, yeah.
yeah, got
As a Game
Ultimate.
Pass subscriber, I know obviously you're someone who plays primarily on PC, so from a hardware standpoint, you're not too affected. But do you come out of this update feeling the same, more confident, less confident in the platform, and does it have any sort of impact on your thoughts towards Xbox and their platform and their games going forward, or are
Yeah,
you just someone who's just I'm going to play the games regardless, or all you're looking for is good games?
yeah, I think I think I'm concerned. Like, there's some concern. I think there's naturally some concern about. I don't think necessarily Microsoft getting out of hardware. So I think that Xbox will continue to offer that for. I mean, at least next gen, if not the gen after. Um, and if it's good hardware, I'll always be interested in picking it up. Like I still have a Series X, even though obviously I play most of my games on PC, and I still sometimes do play on a Series X. And the use case for me is still worth it, even if it's not a thing I
Yeah,
boot up a lot. And I appreciate that that's a very it's quite a privileged position, but that's me. Um, and I still want Microsoft to make hardware because I still want them to compete with
yeah,
Sony
yeah,
on that angle. I don't think nobody should want just Sony occupying what is essentially, like a high performance console gaming market. And I don't think that Sony would go, all right, well, we're just going to take it easy now. They would still want to make great hardware and stuff, but then it becomes, how much are they going to charge for it? They'll be able to justify internally price hikes
yeah.
far easier than they would now when they have active competition in that space. Um, so nobody should want that. And equally, like I said, I'd always want Microsoft to be competing from a hardware perspective because i- if they're competing in that space, it means that they're investing heavily in first party as well. And we should
Yeah.
always want that because we always want the best first party game. So there are some concerns around that, I think, not around the hardware generally, but just about Microsoft are having to change because they've realized that they will never realistically, um, be able to take significant market share from that console market, which is, a limited market, and it's never it does grow. I think people have this conception that console market doesn't grow. It does, but it doesn't grow much like gen
Yeah.
on gen. It really doesn't get that much bigger.
Did you see
So you,
the tweet from, I think it was Christopher Dring, where he was comparing basically the combined estimated like console sales of PlayStation 2 and Xbox, PlayStation 3 and 360, and then PS4,
yeah,
Xbox One, and how similar they were in the total amount of consoles sold across both user bases. Obviously, you've got the Switch in there, which you can't ignore. You know, I do
yeah,
they
yeah,
do
yeah,
they do
yeah.
compete, but
For
I
those
think
two, that doesn't grow that much. Like
yeah,
the growth is actually really like the last gen compared to the gen before that, and all that sort of like the big growth is with Nintendo in terms of how many
yeah,
units they're actually selling, but there's not that much crossover,
yeah.
otherwise. So
Yeah, and that's why I know people like to take the piss out of Phil Spencer when he says things, or when Xbox in general. You know, when they talk about like the 3 billion gamers, or whatever they're
yeah,
talking about. And Phil Spencer spoke about this during the podcast as well, where he's talking about, you know, the maybe the lack of growth there, and he's spoken in the past about, you know, Xbox growing means PlayStation aren't growing, or PlayStation growing means Xbox aren't growing. They're eating,
mm,
you know, the people are eating from the same pie, for lack of a
yeah,
better way of
yeah,
phrasing it.
yeah,
And that's where that kind of philosophy comes from, is they want to expand beyond the current 200 million, or however many customers that they've got. They want to break beyond that. And I kind of understand it when they talk about it, even though people, I think it is easy to take um, the piss out of that, because, you know, 3 billion gamers, yeah, I get it. You know, they're not going to get 3 billion gamers, but what they're talking about is the potential of being able to access more customers than they currently do. And I understand why they want to, and that again just comes full circle to why we're having this conversation in the first place. They're not seeing that expansion
yeah, yeah,
outwards
exactly.
from a
Yeah,
console sales perspective, so they need to look at how they can leverage the customers that are already in that circle.
yeah,
Yeah, so very, very
yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there are some concerns to be had, but they're not massive ones to me. As long as Microsoft continue to offer Game Pass, continue to offer day and date games, continue to invest heavily in their first party, and make, I mean, they make a range of games, but particularly continue to make big budget AAA games, which is, a big part of the console space, or the traditional console space. As long as they continue to do that, then it doesn't really matter to me as much what they do on the platform, on the hardware side.
Yeah,
Um, if one day they get out of it, I think that's bad for like genuinely bad for the industry,
I agree.
and they just become a third party, and you have like your Xbox Game Pass still continues to exist, and I'm sure potentially maybe one day that will be good for Microsoft, like that might be something that makes them a lot of money
Yeah,
one day. But if that were to happen, it wouldn't impact me, because I play most of the games away from their hardware anyway. But I still don't want that to happen. So
yeah,
like,
I
nobody should
agree
want
entirely.
that. So yeah, look, I don't think that's happening, and I think they will figure something out to be able to be, and it we. What annoys me about all of this sometimes is we speak as if they're not successful, that they don't make money in this space. They make a lot of money in this
Yeah,
space already, which is a frustrating element of it. It's just that it's never enough, right? It's never enough. You could
yeah,
always be making much more, and that's what they're looking at. So,
yeah.
you know, yeah, I don't know. What about you? Because obviously you're. I mean, maybe now you got your nice 4070. You'll be coming away from Xbox hardware, or at
Yeah,
least in part. But what do you? I know you agree in terms of the broad rationale of just wanting, no matter where you play, wanting Microsoft to remain in that
yeah.
in that segment. But do you have any other concerns or? thoughts
My,
about it.
yeah, my main concern, I kind of share your concerns. It would be around getting other hardware space and the consumer impact that that would have.
Yeah.
I still play on my Series X more than I play on my PC. Not necessarily through choice, but it's just through.
Yeah.
So I've got an office upstairs. My PC's here, but it's right next to my bedroom.
Okay.
So I still spend a lot of time playing Xbox in the living room on my 4K TV, and then I
That's
come
fair.
upstairs to play on PC. So they kind of complement each other at the moment because previously
Yeah.
I had my Series S. I should probably sell my Series S now to be fair, even though I think it's a great little device. So I will continue to buy that hardware because I want something in the living room. I don't want to have
Yeah.
to build another PC to put,
Yeah.
in front of the TV. Um, just because I spend so much time playing it. And then going back to your original point, around things like libraries and friends, a lot of that still exists on hardware. So I'll probably continue buying that hardware. So I was pleased that they kind of doubled down on that commitment, and it's why I'm so interested in how that goes. But yeah, I agree your sentiment around just the risks that Microsoft changing direction has on the rest of the industry, and particularly us as consumers. That's what we should be worried about: is what's the impact on this to me? Does it potentially mean that things are more expensive? If the answer to that is yes, then you do not want it to happen. And Microsoft becoming a third-party publisher or coming out the hardware space or whatever it may be ultimately leads to that risk. And you're right, nobody should ever want that. To be honest, so I came out of it. I mean, I asked you the question earlier, Luke, around, if we get to a point where Xbox is play our first party games here first and on Game Pass, and let's imagine every single first party game came to other platforms 6 to 12 months after release. That wouldn't change my outlook on Xbox whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'll still buy the hardware. I'm still subscribed to Game Pass because, to your point earlier, when Halo comes out, I'm not waiting 6 months to play Halo. I'm playing it day one.
Else. Yeah.
Yeah. When Fable comes out, I'm playing that day one. Perfect Dark comes out, I'm playing that day one, and I'm still quite excited about their, the potential of their first party lineup. So unless they bring those games day one to other platforms, obviously outside of PC, then it doesn't really impact how I see Xbox. My concern there is, obviously, I'm very heavily invested in Xbox already. What impact does that have on other consumers? So if they made that decision, does that lessen the investment in hardware, and then does that eventually lead to the lack of hardware? I think there's a potential slippery slope, I guess, that could come from it, and then that ultimately leads to what we spoke about, which is a lack of competition. And we don't want, PS3 all over again, without competition. We don't want the Xbox One to happen again, because Microsoft got a little bit complacent, maybe because of the 360 gen and Kinect and things like that. We need these hardware manufacturers competing with each other in any space. Nvidia and AMD. We need AMD to do better from from their side of things when it comes to stuff too, because Nvidia, the prices of graphics cards are obviously ridiculous. So yeah, we just need competition, and that goes for anything in life, basically. Anything where you've got people competing for your money, you need competition, and I don't want to see that competition lost in this space. That's basically kind of where I stand, I think. So, but I don't come out of it with any sort of more or less confidence in the Xbox brand. I kind of come out of it just thinking, yeah, I get it, it makes sense, and I'm interested to see where it goes. But I think they've got a very delicate balance to get over the coming months and years. And if they get that wrong, that could have a potentially quite a harmful consequence for us as consumers. So,
100%.
Cool. We've been going for pretty much 2 hours, mate. Just on one 22-minute podcast that they released. So I think we've done quite well there. And like I said, obviously there's the stuff for PlayStation and Switch that came out. While we're going, before we wrap up, did you want to touch on any of the comments from PlayStation or any of the rumors on the Switch side of things?
Yeah, no, I mean, on PlayStation side, I think, it's kind of except for one element, status quo, which is that they continue to make a load of money, but don't see enough of it. in terms of profit. They still see a lot of profit, but they don't see enough of it. Uh, and that their strategy, will also have to evolve if that means potentially day and date games on PC. To try and do that, or even maybe their strategy on development in general, in terms of coming out with more games like Helldivers, right, which
Yeah.
cost less to make, but can be massive financial successes, as I'm sure this already is. In fact, I think while we've been on, it's what is it now? I always like tracking this. It's
Is it
it
broke
just
350
went.
yet?
No, but it got to 333,000,
Okay, so it's
which
overtaking
it
Halo Infinite
overtaken
then I
Halo,
think.
and
Yeah.
it's also overtaken Destiny too.
Wow.
That's the highest concurrent players. So it's
Yeah.
done, like that's done really, really well. Not just on PC, by the way. It's done really well on PlayStation
Oh
as well,
yeah, yeah.
apparently,
I
according to Arrowhead.
imagine so.
Um,
Yeah, because I
so
think when they
yes,
talked about that 360 concurrent, I think on Steam it was only about 150 on Steam
yeah, or
when they
something
talked
like
about that.
that.
So
Yeah,
they still had a larger concurrent player base on PlayStation. I did see a funny comment comparing Skull and Bones to Helldivers today.
yeah,
When you're
yeah,
talking about things like especially the cost
yeah,
of live service games and the
yeah.
success
The
that
quadruple
Helldivers had, and
layers.
then Skull and Bones apparently came out.
It did.
I've not seen anyone playing it. I literally don't know a single person that's playing it. But
Yeah,
Ubisoft did come out and say, well, it's a quadruple A game, so it deserved that $70
yeah,
price tag. It's
yeah.
got nothing to do with the fact that it took them 15 years or whatever it
Yeah,
was to
yeah,
get
that's
it
the only
out. And
reason it's quadruple
yeah,
A. The only reason
yeah,
those costs are so high is because it's been in development hell for 10 years effectively and
yeah,
finally come out. Yeah, oh God, yeah, that's an interesting one. But
yeah,
like, even I mean, I don't know if you saw, like, still been playing Suicide Squad on PC as well, but like that has not done well at all on PC. So like Steam
yeah.
numbers, like the highest concurrent users that got were, I think, about 11,000 players, which is really bad.
For a
And I
live
think
service game and
for a
during
live
launch week
service,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I think yesterday, day before, it was down to under 1,000 concurrent users, which
yeah.
is
That's
bad,
rough, man.
really bad. And I wouldn't expect that game to do amazingly well on PC. It's much more of a, I think they're looking at PlayStation in particular because they've got
Yeah,
marketing with them to really get sales. But I just can't envisage that have done particularly well. And again, that's a game that has a big budget and took many years to develop, and it's just not
yeah,
it's not panned out well at all. So, and like I mean, bringing it back to Sony, like that is a concern that they have, which is that what if a game just bombs
yeah.
and
I
they've
mean,
spent a ton of
yeah,
money making it? It's they can't do, like, they can do a few of those. You can't keep doing lots of them without having something to subsidize that, right? Or
yeah,
getting development costs down, or having like Helldivers, like a smaller product, smaller price, but still quality and very well targeted, and it does really well, and that makes up for stuff. And like Yoshida spoke before, for example, and like obviously this didn't pan out ultimately, but this was years ago. He was talking about people like, well, Media Molecule, like Dreams wasn't a big financial hit when it launched, and he said something to the lines of, well, yeah, it wasn't, but the point is that we can bear that because like other studios will make up for that with their gains because there will be
yeah,
big financial successes. It allows Media Molecule and other studios to then go in and make something like that, take more risks. But they're getting to the point where they can't take too many risks anymore because the development budgets for these games are just
yeah,
massive, like they're huge. So you can't have I don't know, Ben saying we'd like to do some kind of Souls like like a new IP Souls game. It's like really big risk.
yeah,
So it's difficult. Like PlayStation are in a difficult position as well, but I think their position is just holistically very different from Microsoft's because they're very successful in the console space and they'll continue to be, and they'll continue to make good profit. But they also need to expand their audience to be able to make more money. And for now, at least for the very foreseeable future for them, that's just going to be PC
Yeah.
day one potentially, or closer windows. But yeah, and then Nintendo news. I'm just sad that we might not have a Switch 2 this year because I just don't want Switch hardware anymore. I know Nintendo, look, I mean, Nintendo are making doing miracles on that hardware, and I think it's great. And it's not as if I play my Switch for third-party games, but I just think Nintendo developers with exponentially more powerful hardware could make even more special experiences.
Yeah.
So let's get them onto that. Look, Nintendo are making so much money and they're selling so much hardware. I understand that they might be like, you know what, we don't have the first party in November, but we do in February. So let's just settle for a few months, and that's great for Nintendo, but it's not great for me or you who are just sick of
it. If it is that, surely they could just release another Switch and just go, here's Tears of the Kingdom. And it's pretty. You know, and here's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe 2.
Deluxe, yeah.
Yeah,
8 Deluxe World Tour. Because you just really release it and have all the World Tour, all those DLC track passes.
Yeah.
In that. And it probably sell 15 million copies. It's Nintendo. No one will give a shit.
As long as it's backwards compatible with Switch, I don't I don't see. I mean, I can see why they want to delay it if they don't have some release to go alongside it, but I don't think it's necessary. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe they're worried about what happened with Wii to Wii U, and they've got that in the back of their mind, and they would just want to make sure that when they do release this hardware, they hit the ground running. So,
surely,
but I share those thoughts.
Surely they've got.
Metro Prime 4.
3D, Prime 4, 3D Mario. Surely they're very efficient generally at getting those games out. They've had a big development cycle for this. So are they really saying that's not going to be ready by the end of the year? Metro Prime, I mean, it got rebooted how many years ago?
5.
With Retro? 5?
Yeah.
I know Retro do take long to make games. They've always been like that, but do they have nothing I just can't buy that by the end of the year they will have no big title that they can market with the Switch 2, first party, Pokemon. I know that would be a cross-generational game, probably, right?
But maybe it finally hits 30 FPS on the next Switch.
Yeah, it's locked. It's locked this time.
It's locked. With just 30. A little bit of popping.
Lock 30, a tiny bit of popping, but native 1080p. That would be big. So I just don't the rumors seem very credible that they've delayed it to next year, early next year, which is. I saw one rumor that was it will be March earliest, and I'm like, that's got to be bullshit. That cannot be real. That it's going to be March earliest next year for a launch, because the initial batch was of rumors was Q1, so by the end of March. So I'm just really frustrated by it, because the Switch is a great console. It's had fantastic games.
It's not a great console.
It's not a great console. It's a great handheld that can also double as a not so great console. It's got great games. The OLED version was fantastic. It did elevate the experience, but it can't make up for the hardware shortfall that has. It just can't. I never went back. Bayonetta 3, I'm waiting for a Switch 2 because I cannot play that game.
That's it's funny you say that, because I think, and I kind of, this is kind of critique, but I get it, particularly with how poorly the Wii U sold. But there was a Mario Kart 8 is a good example. Is they were able to leverage their kind of older software titles on Switch and basically re-release them. They had some cross generation games. They had games like Donkey Kong Country, which they re-released and sold at a higher price for the release. They were able to leverage that. They've got the option of potentially doing that with the Switch too, because of these games' performance issues. They could easily re-release a lot of these games with effectively a 60 FPS patch with a performance bump. And obviously it's not going to necessarily sell 40 to 50. Well, I mean, Mario Kart 8 did, so maybe it could. But there's a lot of potential where I don't pick up my Switch now. because I don't necessarily like playing games on it. So unless a new Mario or a new Zelda comes out, realistically, I'm not going to touch it.
Yeah.
But if they did release a patch for something like Bayonetta, I've not played Bayonetta, but let's say they did and they got it working flawlessly, I might pick that game
Yeah.
up. So they've got the
Yeah.
option
Exactly.
of potentially releasing those games. So yeah, I share your concern there, mate. I just want new Switch hardware, new Nintendo hardware sooner rather than later. And yeah, if it's March next year, then I guess it's March next year. I would much rather it was this year. If it is next year, if the rumors do tend to be true, when do you think we find out about the Switch? Because the original rumor was it would be teased in March and released end of year. Do you think that timeline, it's still teased in March and released next year? Or do you think they bump that initial reveal of the Switch back to say summer or maybe even the end of the year?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard one. I think if they were going for like a reveal in March, which was going to be the same as the original Switch reveal, which was essentially that YouTube like video, right? That short form video for 2 minutes, just showing the concept and stuff like that. If that was if that's what the March thing was going to be, I'd prefer that they still did that, even if it's going to come out
Yeah,
next year, early next year.
I think that'll be so long though between. Basically, at that point, you're
It
talking
would,
an entire year between the
it
initial
would, but
reveal and release.
how many people? The thing is, how many people are going to care?
No,
Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
true,
if
true,
anything,
yeah.
that's going to build anticipation for it more because people will be like, "I really want one." I'm going to have to wait. Like, it's not as if they're in that period, like Nintendo are competing against
Fair.
another device.
Yeah,
Now it might. The only thing that makes me think they won't do that is if they are going to release next year, what they won't want to do is cannibalize sales of the current Switch by revealing something coming that's shiny and new and much better, but you're going to have to wait for it because I think they would probably, for that, that kind of consumer, they'd probably be like, well, let's not reveal it too early because they still might buy a Switch. And that's great for us if they do. And then spend
yeah.
loads of money on the games.
That
Not good for
risk
me or you.
exists regardless, though, I guess, doesn't it? Especially
It does,
if
yeah.
that
No matter
window
when you
is
do it.
over the
Yeah.
holiday period.
Yeah.
If they tease it in March or they tease it in September, you're still going into a very key period for
Which is
console
why it's stupid.
manufacturers where they're just gonna potentially wait. Yeah, so
Which
I
is
guess
why it's
on that
stupid if
point,
they delay it.
yeah,
If
why,
they do,
wait?
why wait? Because you're only gonna if you don't delay, if you bring it out in November, then the sales are going to be astronomical either way, no matter
Yeah.
when you bring it out. But if you bring it out in the holiday period, it doesn't matter if it doesn't have tons of big first party games day one, at least in terms of like a brand new 3D Mario or stuff like that. It's going to sell gangbusters because you've released it on the holiday. Like loads of people are going to want one.
Yeah, as
and
long
it's
as
going
it's
to sell
backwards
out.
compatible, 100%.
As long as it's exactly, yeah.
100%.
Like, so it's going to, which, so I don't know, if you bring it out early next year, then they are in that difficulty where there is more risk of cannibalizing their own sales because, as you say, then it's over the holiday period that people are like, well, there's a new one coming in the new year, so actually I'm not going to bother now. So yeah, I just think it's if they're delaying it for the reason that they're rumored to be delaying it, which was a lack of big first party hardware software day one, then I think that's stupid.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think the only thing I could see them, but I don't know if this would even have a possibility of being true. The only reason I could see them coming out and obviously they would never say it, but let's say the backwards compatibility wasn't working for whatever reason.
Yeah,
let's say which I imagine is unlikely because I imagine they've developed the console with that in mind. But let's say like the compatibility wasn't great. I could get that then because that's a big criticism that's been leveraged in Nintendo for a while and something that they're likely to address here. But that seems unlikely, and as you say, the rumors kind of point towards just a lack of killer app available at launch. But as you say, they don't I agree. I don't feel that they need it, particularly if they're going to release it just before the holiday period. And they are able to just leverage some of their existing hardware, like a cross-gen Pokemon game, or just upgrades to existing games. The rumor is it was originally demoed with an up-res version of Breath of the Wild, if I remember rightly, at GDC or something like that last year. So something like that, I think, would be enough. And then if it's a case of, right, Mario's coming out in March, then they're going to get the initial sales it will sell well regardless, I think. And pretty much every new piece of hardware sells well regardless. You're always going to have those hardcore enthusiasts that want the new shiny pretty much straight away. But then you're going to come in March and it's like, right, new Mario, and bam.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as you've got the stock, it's gonna sell out. So
it's not as if you're gonna have to wait for long for if the difference is 5 months currently between when they would like Mario, for example, to be available and when it's actually going to be available, then it again, it's not going to impact console sales because people are going to buy it anyway because it's the new hotness and everybody loves the Switch and wants another Switch. Kids who have bought the Switch, they'll be begging their parents to buy what that's just the way that platform is. And you've then got a release on the horizon which isn't that far, in the launch window that first year. You've got potentially Metroid Prime 4, 3D Mario, other games,
Mario Kart 9,
Mario Kart 9. Yeah, there were rumors that was their biggest budget game ever, Nintendo's biggest budget game ever at this point. All of which will sell gangbusters. So just get the hardware out there. I mean, if even if launch day all you have to rely on is Tears of the Kingdom remastered, I know they'll have backwards compatibility, but even if they said, right, well, it's a £10 up, they did the Sony route.
Yeah.
And then there's a separate SKU, full price SKU for people that don't own it. I mean, look at like Sony Spider-Man remastered, like Part 2 remastered, Last of Us. These have all done really well.
Yeah.
They've all sold really well. So again, Last of Us Part 1 remastered, as in the original PS4 version, that sold exceptionally well. So yeah, I don't get the rationale, to be honest. I think it's a bit. I suspect, I can only imagine it's literally them being spooked by the Wii U.
Yeah,
and being like, we're really scared of that happening again. But you don't need to be, because you've got great hardware this time, and you've got lots of. It's going to be backwards compatible, and you've got lots of great software anyway.
Yeah,
and release it.
And it's also an easier transition. We're not going from the Wii to the Wii U, which was basically a different console. With confusing naming, because it kind of just seemed more like a successor. You're going from Switch to Switch 2, and it's going to be the same device, just more powerful, I imagine. I'm not too sure if there's going to be much of a gimmick.
No,
I mean, time I think it is going to be largely just a Switch, but better, which is what I want. I don't want anything more than that. I hope they do that. Make it ergonomically better, make the Joy-Cons better, make the screen better, make it more powerful. I don't want more than that. So I think that there's much less of a risk there when you're going from a Switch to what I imagine the Switch 2 is going to be, rather than what they were going for when they went from Wii to Wii U. It's a completely different transition for them, and a completely different transition for consumers as well. So
absolutely,
yeah. So we'll see. I mean, look, rumors, insiders and leakers have been very wrong recently. So some of them. So maybe this is another time where it's not. So I mean, if the reveal is still March, we obviously don't have too long to wait to find out. So we'll just have to see.
Wednesday.
So, yeah. But I think on that, mate, I think we can wrap up. Longest episode yet. Well over the 2-hour mark. Spent most of that talking about bloody Xbox's business update, but we did have a few other people drop in that I didn't shout as well. So obviously our good friend Indie Gamers in there as well. Thanks for dropping by, Indy. VJ dropped in as well. VJ, nice to see you dropping in the chat, mate. Really appreciate it. Obviously we've had Stubbs being very active in chat. Appreciate that, Stubbs, the other generator. So appreciate people stopping by. Kind of what I hope from this, Luke, is I really just wanted, hopefully sensible conversation about
I think
the
we
whole
had that.
thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we achieved that. You know, especially
Yeah.
a few days removed from the announcement. You know, none of the bullshit, none of the hysteria. So hopefully we've provided some sort of just sensible discussion on the entire thing. And like I say, I'm really curious to see how it pans out. But
Yeah.
appreciate anybody that's tuned in. Luke, as always, appreciate you being part of it, mate.
No problem.
Hopefully
No
you
worries.
enjoyed it. I had a lot of
Absolutely.
fun, mate. I really enjoyed doing these. Yeah. I don't really normally do this, but do you want to, in case anybody's listening and they don't know where to find you, do you want to shout out where people can find you, mate?
Yeah, just the simplest one is just at LukeSteele90 on Twitter/X. That's probably the best place, and then you'll see other stuff
And you can probably find both of us, hopefully,
on
indie, on an indie games podcast in the not too distant future as well. So keep an eye out
absolutely.
on that. Steve, apologies, Steve. I completely forgot you were here, Steve. You've been a little quiet in the chat, so I'm assuming you've just been listening in the background. Appreciate you joining us, Steve. You did say hello earlier on, mate. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Yeah, hopefully we'll do this again soon. Look, obviously we've had two quite close together. Imagine we'll have a little bit more of a gap between now and the next one, but hopefully we'll do another one in the not too distant future. But as always, mate, thank you very much, and thank you very much everyone for joining. We'll see you on the next show. Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.